Disclaimer: it's inspired by reality, shaped by imagination.
What happens when Tom Cruise, Hollywood's eternal action star, walks onto The View expecting to talk about his latest film, only to end up in a heated clash with Joy Behar over whether there should be an age limit for politicians? The studio was electric before the cameras even rolled. Fans packed the audience expecting laughs and movie talk, not a generational showdown that would set social media on fire. It started light, banter about stunts, legacy, and leadership. But when Joy joked that some people just don't know when to step aside, Tom leaned in, and the temperature on set shifted fast. What followed was a fiery, unfiltered exchange that blurred the line between Hollywood charisma and political passion. Tom defended experience and respect for elders, while Joy argued for change, energy, and new ideas. By the time producers cut to commercial, the audience had witnessed one of the most explosive conversations daytime TV had ever aired. Clips flooded TikTok, headlines screamed, "Tom Cruise loses it on The View," and America was divided. Was Tom defending wisdom or protecting an outdated system? The lights dimmed, the audience's chatter turned into cheers, and The View's theme song hit its final note. Joy Behar grinned toward the cameras, a glint of mischief in her eyes. "All right, everybody," she said, "buckle up because today's guest needs no introduction. He's jumped off cliffs, flown fighter jets, and somehow hasn't aged a day. Please welcome Tom Cruise." The crowd erupted. Tom strode in wearing a dark suit and that familiar, confident smile. He waved, shook hands with the hosts, and gave a small bow to the audience. The energy was pure adrenaline. "Tom," Joy said as they settled into their seats, "you've been doing stunts that make the rest of us nervous just watching. What's your secret to keeping up the energy?" Tom chuckled. "I love what I do. You stay curious, stay active, and age becomes just a number." The audience cheered. It was a friendly start, warm, upbeat, all smiles. But Joy leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. "Speaking of age," she said, tone playful but pointed, "that brings us to something that's been all over the news lately. Should there be an age limit for politicians?" The crowd reacted instantly. A few claps, a few murmurs. Tom smiled, but his expression sharpened. "That's an interesting question," he said, "but I think age isn't the problem. It's about capability, commitment, and integrity. You can be 40 and out of touch, or 80 and still sharp as ever." Joy raised an eyebrow. "So you don't think there should be any limit? No cutoff? Even if someone's clearly past their prime?" Tom's smile thinned slightly. "I think we underestimate people with experience. These are men and women who've dedicated their lives to public service. You don't just throw that away because of a number." A few people in the audience clapped, but others exchanged glances. Joy's smirk widened. "Tom, I get it. You do your own stunts, you hang off airplanes, and that's great," she said. "But government isn't an action movie. If someone's in their 80s and forgetting names, maybe it's time to hand over the car keys." The audience gasped and laughed. Tom's jaw tightened, though he kept his voice calm. "I don't think you can judge everyone by a few examples," he said. "I've worked with incredible people in their 70s who are sharper than most 20-year-olds I know." "Wisdom counts for something, sure," Joy said, tilting her head. "But at what point does wisdom turn into stubbornness? We've got senators falling asleep on camera, presidents mixing up names. It's embarrassing. Don't you think leadership should reflect the future, not the past?" Tom leaned in slightly, elbows on the table, tone measured. "But experience is the future's foundation. You can't build something lasting if you keep tearing down the people who came before." The audience clapped again, louder this time. Joy smiled, letting the applause simmer before cutting in. "Okay, but tell that to the young voters who feel ignored. They look at Washington and see a retirement home, not leadership." Tom gave a small laugh, but it didn't reach his eyes. "And whose fault is that, Joy? If young people want change, they have to show up, vote, get involved. You don't solve apathy by blaming older leaders." That landed, the audience murmured approvingly. Joy crossed her legs, smirking. "I just think sometimes you've got to know when to bow out gracefully. Not everyone can hang off a helicopter at 60. Tom laughed, though the tension was palpable. Maybe not everyone wants to, but age doesn't define purpose. Look at Harrison Ford. Look at Clint Eastwood. They're still out there doing what they love because passion doesn't retire. Whoopi Goldberg, sensing the temperature rising, jumped in. Okay. Let's not turn this into mission. Debate impossible, all right? The audience burst into laughter. Joy chuckled, but Tom's gaze stayed fixed, unwavering. I just think, he said quietly, when you tell people they're too old to matter, you're not talking about politics anymore. You're talking about respect. That line landed like a stone in water. The laughter faded into a heavy hush. Joy blinked, thrown for a split second, then smiled tightly. Respect goes both ways, Tom. Maybe it's time the older generation respects that the world's moving on. The audience gasped again. The camera panned across the table. Tom's jaw set, Joy's smirk steady, Whoopi shifting uncomfortably between them. The spark had caught. What started as playful banter was now something else entirely, a generational battle unfolding live on national television.
The tension in the studio was so thick you could feel it through the cameras. The audience had gone from laughter to nervous anticipation, watching Tom Cruise and Joy Behar circle each other like two seasoned performers who suddenly realized the script had vanished. Joy smiled sweetly, adjusting her notes, but her voice carried an edge. Tom, I get what you're saying about respect, but when you have leaders who can barely walk up a flight of stairs or remember what state they're in, it's not disrespectful to say maybe it's time for someone younger to take the wheel. The audience chuckled, though uneasily. Tom's smile didn't move. You're assuming age equals incompetence, he said. That's a dangerous road, Joy. Should we set an age limit for teachers, judges? How about actors? Should I retire because I'm 63? That hit home. The crowd erupted in cheers and whistles. Joy held her ground. That's not the same thing. You're not making laws that affect millions of people. Tom leaned back, crossing his arms. You're right. I just risked my life for entertainment. But those leaders you're talking about, many of them have risked everything for decades to serve this country. Maybe they've earned the right to stay in the game. A few audience members clapped again. Whoopi, sensing the intensity rising, tried to jump in. You know what I think? The real question is, should there be an age minimum, too? But Joy wasn't done. Come on, Tom. Don't turn this into a sentimental thing. There's a difference between respect and denial. If someone's too old to keep up with modern issues, like technology, global trends, climate policy, how can they lead effectively? Tom's tone shifted. The warmth was gone. His voice was calm, but clipped. You know, Joy, I've trained with pilots in their 70s who can still outfly guys half their age. You don't lose awareness just because you've seen more birthdays. You gain perspective. The audience applauded again, some even standing. Joy looked out at the crowd, clearly noticing the split reaction. Well, she said dryly, sounds like the Top Gun crowd is in the house. Laughter rippled through the audience, but Tom didn't take the bait. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes steady. This isn't about movies. It's about judging people by what they can do, not how many candles on their cake. You want limits? Fine. Set them based on health, mental sharpness, performance. But age? That's prejudice in disguise. That word, prejudice, hung in the air like smoke. The crowd murmured. Joy raised her eyebrows. Prejudice? Really? You're comparing asking for new leadership to discrimination? Tom nodded slowly. If you tell an entire generation they're too old to contribute, you're not pushing progress, you're pushing them out the door. And someday, Joy, that'll be you. The crowd gasped audibly. Even Whoopi's mouth fell open. Joy's jaw tightened, though she kept her composure. I'll happily step aside when I can't keep up, but I'll also know when that time comes, something a lot of politicians don't seem to recognize. Tom didn't flinch. Maybe that's because they're still doing the job better than half the people criticizing them. Or maybe, Joy countered, voice rising, they're clinging to power because they're afraid of what happens when they let go. The words hung heavy. The studio fell silent except for the low hum of the cameras. Whoopi raised her hand. Okay, before we start throwing campaign buttons, let's breathe for a second. But Tom was already leaning forward again. You know what I think this really comes down to? We live in a culture that worships youth and forgets the value of experience. We cheer for young influencers, but dismiss the people who actually built something lasting. That's not progress, that's amnesia. That line drew a wave of applause, deep and sustained. Even some of the crew clapped. Joy took a sip of her coffee, eyes locked on him. You're very passionate about this, I'll give you that. But you're not exactly unbiased. Hollywood keeps people young forever, Tom. You've got personal trainers, chefs, entire teams helping you look half your age. Try being an 80-year-old senator, running on black coffee and stress. The crowd laughed again, but Tom didn't smile. That's exactly my point. You see the image, not the person. People are more than their wrinkles, Joy. I've met soldiers in their 80s who could run circles around kids today because they've got purpose. That doesn't fade, it deepens. The applause swelled again. Joy's smile wavered. So you're saying there's never a time to step aside? She asked, eyes narrowing slightly. Tom met his gaze without blinking. There's a time to mentor. There's a time to pass the torch, but it should be a choice, not a cutoff imposed by people who think they know better. A few people in the audience shouted, "That's right." The clapping turned rhythmic, echoing through the studio. Joy forced a laugh, shaking her head. You really could run for office, you know that. Tom chuckled softly. No thanks, I already deal with enough explosions. Laughter broke the tension, but just barely. Beneath the humor, something had shifted. The smiles were polite, but the air was tight. What had started as a spirited discussion was now a full-blown philosophical divide, one that neither was willing to back down from. And as the camera zoomed in on Joy's composed smirk and Tom's unwavering stare, everyone in the room knew the real fireworks were still to come. The next segment began after a short break, but the tension hadn't cooled. If anything, it had thickened. The audience leaned forward, sensing they were about to witness something rare, a moment when celebrity polish cracks and real conviction spills out. Joy Behar shuffled her notes, forcing a smile. All right, we're back with Tom Cruise, and we've been talking about whether there should be an age limit for politicians. Tom, during the break you said something interesting. You mentioned that experience teaches resilience. Can you explain what you meant? Sure, he said. You know, when I was younger, I thought speed and energy were everything. But over time, I learned that real leadership isn't about moving fast. It's about standing steady when everyone else is falling apart. The audience listened closely. He wasn't performing now. He was speaking from the gut. Joy interjected, her voice measured. That's fair, Tom, but you're comparing film sets to the Senate floor. A director in his 70s isn't the same as someone making decisions that affect millions. Tom's jaw tensed, but he nodded. You're right, it's not the same. It's harder. That's why I respect the people who still show up every day, even when they're criticized for being too old. They've been through wars, recessions, pandemics, and they keep serving. That's not vanity. That's courage. Applause broke out again, this time louder. Tom waited for it to fade before continuing. I had a mentor once, an old stunt coordinator. Guy was 78, had bad knees, could barely lift his arms some days, but he was still the sharpest mind on set. I remember one day I asked him why he didn't retire. He looked at me and said, because when I stop showing up, I stop existing. That stuck with me. The studio was silent, except for a few murmurs of agreement. Joy tilted her head, softening slightly. That's a moving story, Tom. But at some point, don't you think the need to stay relevant can blind people to reality, especially in politics? Sometimes letting go is an act of love for the country, not weakness. Tom sighed and gave a small nod. Maybe, but who gets to decide when that moment comes, Joy? The public? The media? You? We talk about democracy, but then we want to control who's fit to lead based on age instead of ability. That's not democracy. That's convenience." The line drew a low rumble of applause and a few cheers. Whoopi jumped in, her tone light but her eyes serious. "Tom, let me play devil's advocate here. You're defending older leaders because you believe in experience. But what if that experience becomes a wall? What if they stop listening to new voices?" Tom turned toward her, grateful for the nuance. "That's fair, Whoopi, but you don't fix that by kicking them out. You fix it by creating a culture of mentorship. Let the young learn from the old, and the old learn from the young. That's how things grow." The audience clapped again. This time, almost everyone joined in. Joy, however, wasn't ready to yield. "But Tom," she said, leaning forward, "the problem is some of these politicians don't mentor. They hold on to power until they can't even remember the bill they signed. There's nothing noble about that. It's ego, and it hurts the country." Tom's expression changed. The easy smile disappeared. He looked at her directly, his voice lower, steadier. "I get that you're frustrated with politics, Joy. A lot of people are. But I think we've forgotten that age doesn't cause corruption. Ambition does, and that exists in every generation." That landed like a punch. The audience erupted in applause, whistling and shouting. Joy blinked, momentarily thrown. Then she gave a dry laugh. "Okay, Tom Cruise giving us a civics lesson. Didn't see that coming." Laughter rippled through the room, but the mood had changed. Tom wasn't smiling anymore. He leaned closer, eyes locked on hers. "I'm not giving a lesson. I'm giving perspective. You talk about age like it's a curse, but every wrinkle, every scar, every year, those are reminders of what people have survived. We should honor that, not mock it." The applause swelled again, louder than before. Some audience members even stood up. Joy's smirk faltered. She leaned back, crossing her arms. "You're very emotional about this." Tom gave a short, sharp laugh. "Yeah, maybe I am. Because I've seen what happens when people get tossed aside for being too old, too slow, or too different. My mother worked until she couldn't stand. No one asked her for her birth certificate. They just respected the work she did. That's the world I want to see again." The room erupted in a standing ovation. Even Whoopi clapped. Joy tried to speak, but the applause drowned her out. Tom looked down, clearly moved, before giving a small nod of thanks to the crowd. When the noise finally died down, Joy leaned in again, her tone quieter but still challenging. "You make a good point, Tom, but politics isn't personal, it's structural. Age limits aren't about cruelty. They're about accountability." Tom's reply was measured, but it carried weight. "Accountability comes from doing your job, not from the year you were born. The moment we start judging leaders by their birth date instead of their integrity, we lose something bigger than politics. We lose respect." There it was, the emotional flashpoint, the moment where debate became something deeper, something human. Whoopi exhaled, glancing toward the camera crew, who were frozen in awe. "All right, I think we all need a drink after this one." Laughter returned, but this time it was uneasy. The segment wasn't over, but everyone in that studio knew they had crossed into territory that couldn't be smoothed over by jokes. The real storm was about to begin. The studio lights were blazing hot now, though no one dared to move. The crew behind the cameras exchanged nervous glances. The panelists were sitting just a little too still, voices just a little too careful. Everyone knew they were one spark away from losing control of the segment completely. Joy Behar broke the silence first, forcing a chuckle. "Well, Tom, I've got to hand it to you," she said. "You've got more passion than half of Congress. Maybe we should just make you president." The audience laughed, grateful for the release. Tom smiled politely, but the tension in his shoulders didn't fade. "I think the job's already taken," he said, voice even. "But if I were, I'd start by asking people to stop writing each other off." Joy raised her eyebrow. "That sounds nice," she said, "but we're talking about reality, not movie ideals." Tom's eyes narrowed slightly. "Reality is what you make it, Joy.
That's the problem. People talk about leadership like it's a youth contest. It's not about age, it's about heart. Joy set her pen down with a snap. Heart doesn't pass budgets, Tom. Heart doesn't sign laws or negotiate peace deals. That takes clarity, stamina, and sometimes knowing when to pass the baton. The audience reacted with a mix of applause and murmurs. Tom leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. You make it sound like experience is a liability. But you know what? I'd rather have someone with 50 years of lessons than someone who's still figuring out who they are. Or, Joy countered quickly, you can have both, but you can't pretend age doesn't affect ability. Look, I love my elders, but I also know what it's like when they refuse to see that the world's changed. Tom gave a short, humorless laugh. You mean they refuse to see your version of the world? That line landed hard. The audience gasped. Joy's tone sharpened. You really don't like being challenged, do you? Tom shook his head. No, I love being challenged, but I respect honesty. And what you're doing right now isn't about age, it's about control. You want a world where people only matter until they make you uncomfortable. The room went silent. Whoopi raised her hands again. All right, let's... But Joy cut in, her voice rising. Oh, please, Tom, don't lecture me about respect. I've been working in this industry longer than some of your movies have been around. I know how to tell when someone's hiding behind a pretty speech. Tom's chair squeaked slightly as he leaned forward, voice low but fierce. And I know how to tell when someone stops listening. The air was thick. Every camera was locked on them. Whoopi tried again, half joking. I feel like we should have booked a therapist instead of a guest today. The audience laughed nervously, but Tom didn't break eye contact. His voice softened, but it trembled slightly with emotion. You talk about letting go like it's noble, Joy, but what you're really saying is once people reach a certain age, they stop mattering. That's not progress, that's cruelty. Joy's face tightened. Don't twist my words. I'm saying leadership is a responsibility, not a hobby. If someone can't remember what bill they're signing, they shouldn't be in charge. That's not cruel, it's common sense. Tom's hand hit the table, not loud, but enough to make the audience jolt. Then judge them by their actions, not their birthdays, he said sharply. The room fell dead silent. Even the camera operators froze. Whoopi looked at Tom, startled, then back at Joy. Joy stared at him for a long moment before replying. You know, Tom, you're talking like you've been personally attacked. No one's saying older people can't have value. We're saying maybe it's time to let new voices have a chance. Tom took a breath, trying to steady himself. New voices do have a chance, but that doesn't mean we silence the ones that built the stage. Applause erupted again, some cheering, some booing. The split in the crowd mirrored the split on stage. Joy leaned back, arms crossed, smiling tightly. That's the problem with Hollywood types, she said. You think everything's a moral crusade. This is about competency, not compassion. Tom's expression hardened. No, it's about humanity. You start deciding who's too old to think, too old to lead, too old to matter, and next thing you know, you're deciding who's too different to belong. The crowd gasped. Whoopi's eyes widened. Whoa, okay, let's take a breath. But the audience was already reacting, half cheering, half stunned. Joy opened her mouth to reply, but stopped when she saw Tom's expression. His composure was cracking, but not with anger, with something heavier. You know what I think? He said quietly. I think this country's forgotten how to value the people who got us here. We mock our elders. We call them outdated. But those are the people who sacrificed so we could sit here and argue on TV. And we repay them by calling them irrelevant? The audience applauded again, some standing. Joy sat back, momentarily speechless. Whoopi leaned forward, her voice gentle. Tom, that's powerful, but Joy isn't wrong that leadership takes awareness. There is a balance. Tom nodded, visibly trying to calm himself. There is, and the balance isn't found in a law. It's found in respect. Joy exhaled, finally speaking softly. Maybe, but sometimes respect means knowing when to step aside so the next generation can lead. Tom's eyes met hers, unwavering. And sometimes leadership means standing your ground even when people tell you you're too old to matter. That line silenced the room. For several seconds, no one moved. Then, almost on cue, the director's voice echoed through the studio. "We'll be right back after the break." The theme music kicked in, but the tension didn't move. Tom sat back slowly, eyes distant. Joy looked down at her notes, tapping her pen, her expression unreadable. As the cameras cut, the audience whispered in awe. They had just witnessed something raw, something real. And it wasn't over yet.
When the cameras came back from commercial, the mood in the studio had completely shifted. The laughter was gone. The air felt charged, like everyone knew they'd just seen something that wouldn't fade once the credits rolled. Joy Behar looked across the table at Tom Cruise, her usual smirk replaced with something quieter. "Tom," she said, her tone noticeably softer, "I didn't expect this conversation to go where it did." Tom gave a small nod. "Neither did I." The audience chuckled lightly, easing the tension just enough. Joy sighed and leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. "You know, you made a good point before the break," she said. "I might have been a little too sharp." Tom smiled faintly. "You weren't wrong to challenge me. I've seen too many people written off because of their age, and I think we lose something every time we do that." Joe jumped in gently. "You two basically just had the debate America's been having for years. And maybe that's the point. It's not about who's right. It's about listening." Applause rippled through the audience. Joy looked down at her notes, then back up at Tom. "My mom's 91, sharp as a tack. She'd probably yell at me for half of what I said today." The crowd laughed, and Tom laughed with them. Joy smiled. "But I also watched her slow down, forget things she used to do in her sleep. It's hard, Tom. Watching the people you love change. It's not about disrespect. It's about facing reality." Tom nodded, visibly moved. "I get that. My mom was the same way before she passed. But I still think, every time we underestimate someone just because of their age, we take away their purpose, and purpose keeps people alive." A long silence followed, warm, not tense this time. Whoopi leaned back, letting the moment breathe. "Maybe the truth is somewhere in the middle," she said. "Maybe what we need isn't an age limit, just accountability for everyone, young or old." Applause filled the studio, this time louder, more heartfelt. Tom turned to Joy. "I can live with that." Joy extended her hand. "Truce?" He took it. "Truce." The audience stood, clapping, cheering. Not for victory, but for reconciliation. The show's theme music began to swell, but no one looked away from the stage. What started as another heated political debate had turned into something deeper. A rare moment of honesty in a world built on talking points and headlines. Later that night, clips of the exchange flooded social media. Hashtags like Cruise versus Behar and Respect at Any Age trended for days. Viewers debated every line, every look, but most agreed on one thing. It was one of the most powerful moments The View had ever seen. Tom Cruise walked off set that day, not as an actor promoting a film, but as a man who stood his ground for something he believed in. And Joy Behar, for once, didn't walk away with the last word. She walked away thinking. If you enjoyed this dramatic showdown, make sure to subscribe for more celebrity clashes, emotional debates, and unforgettable talk show moments. And tell us in the comments, do you think there should be an age limit for politicians, or should experience always have a seat at the table?